Okay, we're moving into the guided reading for levels D through I. So these are students who are much more fluent with sight words. They know more sight words. They have the early strategies like one-to-one match, return, sweep, and checking the picture down. And so now they're going to be reading more complicated texts. Let's first look at the type of text that they're reading, and then we'll get into this little lesson plan a bit and think about how to integrate parts of the template together. So when kids are reading for this particular template, they're going to be reading books that are moving away from the strong patterns and picture support that we had in earlier levels. So let me just give you an example. Here is a text. It's called Where's Tim? And this would be a level D text. And we still have a pattern. Is he in the kitchen? No. Is he under the table? No. Now the trick is the pattern isn't as controlled. There are changes in the middle of this, in the, under the, and it would be hard to predict kitchen from just the picture, as well as this could be a lot of things other than table. So these books, starting with D, are specifically engineered to make students use more of their phonics knowledge. They're ready for this, hopefully, because we've taught them in levels A through C about lots of letter name and within word stage phonics features. So they may, at this point, if they can't just predict it from the picture, they may be able to start decoding through that word. So as you go through the texts, you'll notice that if there is a pattern, it's more complicated. So by this time, this is like an E level text, I think. And as you're going through, actually this is a D. So by the red house, there is a blue house. And by the blue house, there is a, so the pattern is now across pages. And let's skip up a little bit. We'll go from, you can see this, the shifts are kind of small. There's still not many words on a page as you're getting into E and F. But by the time that you're moving into, here's F, Spider is laughing. Don't you laugh at me, says Bird, or I'll eat you. But Spider can't stop laughing, so Bird eats him. Mature content too. Now Bird can't stop laughing. Don't you laugh at me, says Cat, or I'll eat you. But Bird can't stop laughing, so well, you know what happens. Well, here we definitely see a pattern that's taking place across 2 pages. And that's going to require the student to read fluently so that they continue the thought of this sentence and story across 2 pages. It requires them to decode pretty quickly and to decode some very big words. And the picture support is not sufficient enough to solve all the words on the text. So you really have to be able to look into this word to decide what that word is. Look into the picture, yeah, and look into the word. So let's look up to a little bit more complex. Here's In Grandma's Garden. This is a level G. And now you can see we have much more text. We have complicated punctuation. We have multiple characters. And this is one of those things that kids have to learn how to, not have to decode the word Alice every time because they remember the character Alice across the text. There is no more pattern at G. G, there is no pattern. There may be a lot of repeated words, right? So the word garden is rather unique, but it's going to be repeated multiple times across pages. But no pattern. So now kids really have to rely on decoding. And you'll notice that the words in this text also have a lot of within word stage features. So we really still have to continue to hit phonics and word study in these guided reading lessons so kids will have the knowledge to decode these more complicated words. And now this one up here is an I, so you can get a sense that these texts are getting much more complicated, much more text on a page, lots of bigger and novel words. So at this point, level H, I, J, kids really need to be able to decode text, to be able to monitor for meaning and structure, to say, maybe I say garage for this word, I have to think, well, does it look right? Does it make sense with the story? And can we say it that way in English? So a lot of monitoring. We want to see monitoring at this level. So these texts are much more complicated. And that's on purpose because we want to push the child to do some more sophisticated reading. This is still a 2-day lesson plan. Now, if I were going to do one thing, if I were teaching this D to I lesson plan, I think I would actually type this up on a Word document so that I had day 1 and then I had a column here for taking notes. I don't like that the 2-day format now removes my ability to do the formative assessment right on the lesson plan. And that's how templates work. You should feel like you are not only allowed to, but encouraged to adapt these when you teach so that they meet the needs of your particular population. On day 1, we're following very similar structure to the the lesson plan that we learned last week. We're going to start out with sight word review, a few words where the children are writing the sight words as practice, because production is always more complicated than recognition of those sight words. Then we're going to do a book introduction. Our book introductions are still going to have those 3 elements. So we're still going to do a gist statement, what the story is about. We are still going to talk about novel vocabulary. So if kids don't know what a hammock is, I might talk about that. And we are still going to do a couple of predict and locates. So you'll have to find words in here that you think are a little bit tricky and that the student could use a little help getting into those words. And you could do more than 2 predict and locates. I wouldn't do a predict and locate on every page, maybe 2 or 3. And so the structure is here: synopsis, that's your gist statement, and then vocabulary, you might be talking about hammock, and then you can write PL, the page number, and the words you're going to do the predict and locates. Now, can anybody remember the magic phrase for predict and locate? So, for example, if I were going to do predict and locate on the word plenty, I could say, you know what, on this island there is lots of water nearby. We can say that there is plenty of water. That's another way to say lots of water. Plenty. What would you expect to see at the beginning of the word plenty? P, plenty, there you are. So I kind of attacked that as a vocabulary word and also did the predict and locate. The magic words are, what would you expect to see at the beginning of the word, and then whatever your target word is. Students are now going to read that text. As kids are getting into these larger books, sometimes I have the kids read quietly at the table. Other times I will have them kind of spread out, and so maybe a couple of kids will be reading at their seat, and then I'll listen to a couple of kids at the table. I'm going to read this book with kids 2 days, and so if I don't hear everybody read the first day, that's fine, because I can do some reading and coaching with kids on the second day as well. Here are the prompts that Richardson is suggesting. They're some of the same prompts that we had before. We're probably not going to have to say things like read it with your finger, because kids wouldn't be at this text level if they didn't know how to do one-to-one match. So instead, we're going to have them check that first letter like we have before. We are going to have them think about what would make sense and look right. So these are actual things you would say to kids. What would make sense and look right? Check the middle or the end of the word. Now this is very much more specific than saying sound it out. So if a child was struggling on this text and they said swim for swimming, then I might say, check the ending. Now this only works if kiddos know this particular phonics feature, so that's why we keep teaching these phonics features. If a child said, let's say, you could dig a hole and make a swimming pole, I might say, does that sound right? A swimming pole? And then I might also do this little move like we did in phonics, where I isolate the part that was miscued and say, what's that sound? Ooh, and then go across the word, pool. So these prompts, check the middle, check the end, are similar to that. Cover the ending, find a part you know. So that's what I was doing with my finger there, the child who said swim for swimming, I'm covering the part that they need to pay attention to. So it highlights the part they missed. Okay. And then, do you know another word looks like this one? So that's for if the child might know a word. So maybe the child knows the word land and they're not getting island. So you could say, do you know this part of the word? Land, and then you could get them started island. And then try the other vowel sound. So if the child was reading along and they said, you could cut a Nike, you could say, what's the other vowel sound? It. So these are really useful prompts, and we'll do a little bit of a prompting workout on another screencast here with these level of prompts. So maybe it would make sense to read through these and get them in your head a little bit. After the reading, you're going to talk about what the kids read here in the discussion prompt. And then down here, you're going to do some teaching after the record. So you might talk to them about contractions or breaking words apart as a strategy, or checking the ending. What you do here, as well as what you do here, depends on what kids are doing while they're reading. So if you notice that a lot of kids, another factor in these higher level texts, is you'll notice that the sentence doesn't end at the end of the line. And so kids have to carry the meaning through multiple lines, 3-4 lines, and stop at the period. So if you have kids that are blowing through that period while you're reading with them after the running record, you might come back and talk to the whole group about find the period on the page. When you come to that, I want you to take a breath, and that'll help you make sense of the story. When you see a comma, take a little pause. So you don't want to read like this. Don't read, you could go for a big long walk, but don't forget to look at a map so you won't get lost. That doesn't make sense. Now try it again and take a small pause at the comma and a big break at the period. Ready? You could go for a big long walk. That makes so much more sense. So when you're reading, be careful to read the punctuation. So that's the kind of thing that you might talk about after. Again, it depends on what they did while you were listening to them read. Then we're going to teach one new sight word. Look at that, same protocol that we've learned in phonics and practiced in the A to C lesson plan. And then we're going to do word study because we don't want these kids to be struggling with decoding. Decoding is a part of these harder texts. And if we don't teach those phonics features, then we're not teaching them the tools they need to do that decoding work. We still have picture sorts. Hey, and in all your spare time, you could be making, remember those envelopes I showed you? You could be making an envelope with pictures for every letter of the alphabet and have that organized so you could do this really easily. Making words. And so we've learned how to do those two with videos from last week. And then today we'll talk about sound boxes, which are a very streamlined version of Elkonin boxes. So I'll be demonstrating that today. And then also analogy charts, which is actually just a closed, teacher-directed writing sort. Oh my gosh, do you remember phonics? Yeah, closed, teacher-directed writing sort. On the second day, we're going to go through the same process with the book. The second day, kids have already read this, so we may be focusing more on fluency as opposed to decoding. Discussion, talk about fluency and how we're making it sound like talk. You reteach the sight word. And then for writing, you're going to do some writing, but the writing now is independent. We're not so much worried about crafting sentences like we were in the A to C lesson plans, crafting sentences as the teacher that would help students practice particular features that they just learned. Instead, we're going to ask kids to talk about, the beginning, middle, and end of the text, or talk to me about a new fact you learned from the reading. All right, so this is a quick overview of the lesson plan. In our next couple of segments, we're going to look at specifically the book introduction with larger books, how to prompt during the text reading, and then adding these two word study elements. Thank you.